One of the ironies of working in the mental health and suicide prevention space is that we often need to reach people who are in roles that carry high stress, high risk, yet who, by the very nature of their jobs, may be extremely reluctant to seek professional help. So think about law enforcement, pilots, medical doctors, nurses, military personnel, those holding security clearances. All these individuals are concerned that something might happen to their livelihood, yet they recognize that they need support. So these people may have a justifiable fear that any open discussion about their mental health could put their livelihood at risk. And that fear, of course, simply adds to their stress. So how do you reach those groups?
Fortunately, our next speaker is well qualified to address that very question. We go to Fort Worth, Texas now to hear from Dr. Charles B. Williams. Good afternoon, Dr. Williams.
Good afternoon, David. Hey, Mark.
Hey, Charles.
Dr. Williams is a board-certified emergency physician as well as a licensed police officer in the state of Texas with over 20 years' experience in trauma in all its forms. He has subject matter expertise in critical care, civilian and military special operations, and terrorism mitigation. He is currently the Chief Medical Officer of Lockheed Martin Corporation, where he has global oversight over on-site medical operations and crisis management. He is joining us from his home in Fort Worth, Texas. Please welcome Dr. Charles B. Williams.
Thanks so much, David. And Mark, thanks again for the invitation to participate in this. I can't tell you how professionally and personally pivotal this is. It truly is an honor to be here today and to hear such a great panel of folks talking about things that really can be significantly impactful to many people's lives. As we talked about, and as you mentioned, one of the populations that really I've lived and breathed with for decades and continue to do so in my current role are people that really work in high stress environments and high risk environments, and people that hold security clearance classification to do some very important things for national and international and global security. And so one of the things I wanted to talk about a little bit today was, who are those people and how do you reach those people? Because the nature of the business and the work that they do really does drive a tremendous amount of stress in their life, as well as a lot of trauma and a lot of drama that really trickles down into things that they need to be able to speak about and do that openly, but there's an incredible stigma that exists. So I wanted to start with thinking about who are those people that do that. If you think about who are the roles, who are the individuals that choose the role to work in a high risk, a high stress environment, sometimes making life or death decisions in the matter of moments. You think of those people that really have a strong sense of purpose. Those have a tremendous feeling of purpose to the cause that they're serving. Those are individuals that have typically incredible responsibilities most of the time that touch not only their life, but multiple lives as well. Those are individuals that work under the expectation, both internally and self-imposed expectations, that they have to have the ability to perform those tasks and functions without implicit institutional bias and without really the emotions that normally drive our everyday decisions in a very logical and realistic format. And those individuals are making decisions in many instances that are, again, life and death, or have implications to the lifestyle and manner of multiple others. In order to do that and to meet the expectations that are both internal and external, many times people build these barriers or firewalls between their emotions, their personalities, and the work that they have to do. That firewall, as you mentioned, Mark, is ironic that firewall, in order for them to affect their job and do it with precision, is actually one of the things that helps enable the stigma that if I talk about the challenges, the concerns that I'm having, the worries that I have, and the emotional challenges that I face as an individual, that the fear is that that's going to put our job and our ability to do the role that we committed to do effectively. I know this because, again, I'm an emergency medicine physician and law enforcement officer, and for 2 decades, over 2 decades, professionally, I've had the opportunity to witness and care for people that have attempted suicide countless times, and unfortunately, I've had the chance to see people that were successful in their suicidal attempts more times than I want to know. As a family member, as a father, my family and I continue to struggle on a daily basis with the tragedy of losing my youngest daughter, who is a beautiful 16-year-old girl, 8 years ago this month to suicide. So personally and professionally, and as a chief medical officer for a major organization in the defense industry, I too have to walk the walk that we're talking about. So I thought that it would be interesting and hopefully helpful to the group to talk about how do you reach that group? How do you get them to talk? How do you help them understand that it's important that they too, despite having to be Superman or woman in some instance, they too should have an opportunity to talk about their kryptonite or the challenges that they have. The great news is many of the things that we've heard already from the presenters are all elements of what you need. I think, and I took notes because it was all fantastic, and I always translate that information over. The work that Dr. Frey and Dr. England were talking about, as far as and Dr. Sandy were talking about putting together a healthy work environment and a workplace and a culture in which it is okay to talk about those things are so important. Working with special operations teams, small teams, and so forth, the thing that they truly, that makes them successful is knowing about each other, not only their strengths, but their vulnerabilities. And so there's a few things that came to mind that I thought about. What are the things that really are important for this community of the employees that work in high-risk environments and those people that hold security clearance classification? We'll talk a little bit about that in just a second. And it really is much the same as what you do for any employee or any other person that's out there, that you get an indication that there's a challenge. The first thing I talk about is active listening. And I think it was Dr. Sandy that was just talking about that. What is active listening? And that is really looking for changes in behavior. When I talk to my teams about how do they connect with their employees on their emotional well-being, I tell them to listen and to do that actively. And that's not just with your ears, but with your eyes, looking at behaviors, changes in habitus, whether they're disheveled, whereas they're normally, very well kept, whether or not they're showing up to meetings, whether or not they are late or prompt or they're prepared, so forth. So looking for those things, not just listening for the words they're saying, but I also tell my team to listen with your heart. So I think it was, I think, Mark, you were actually talking about your first interface with a person who was had suicidal ideation, that was having challenges, and that you noticed that something was off. There wasn't anything specific that you saw, you just felt that something was off. What I tell people is to listen with your heart, because we do instinctually, if we're truly listening and we're actively listening, we have the ability in many instances to make a determination when something just isn't right. And you should have that ability and know what to do to act on that. So active listening is one of the things that I talk about. The other thing that's important for special operations teams, high-risk employees, they're working in high-risk employees, people with security clearances is another thing we talked about. And that's, I think John talked about that as he was talking about the work that he was doing in the Army, in the military. And that is understanding that you're not alone. So normalization versus minimization. In other words, letting other people know that what they are experiencing is understood, and that many people do that. Now, it's not saying everyone thinks that way, so just disregard it. That's minimization. Normalization is saying, listen, we understand this is an issue. How do we work through this issue? And by the way, a lot of people have this issue as well. So for people that are the elite, we call that in my genre, we call that the tip of the spear. So those people that are the tip of the spear are afraid of no longer being the tip. You need to help those people understand that everyone has emotional issues at some point in time in their life, and they should be prepared and know how to work through those things. So normalization, so active listening, normalization, vulnerability. One of the ways that I connect with my teams and the people that I work with is letting them know that I too am a person. And just as we've talked about earlier, I too and my family have had their struggles with people with emotional health and well-being and have had tragic consequences. So people knowing that tends to open up that aperture of exactly what we're talking about, and that is building this circle of trust. The fact that they trust you enough to work with them to help them work through this issue, and it doesn't denigrate, one, the professionalism of the role that they do and the tasks that they have at hand. So incredibly important to bring an element of vulnerability into that and engender trust as well. And so along the line of trust, I want to quickly talk about security clearances. The federal government recognized years ago that the standard that they had for what qualified for losing your security clearance was much too rigid and much too tight. And so there was a very intentional element throughout our federal government to rewrite the language around what qualifies for reporting needs for security clearance and what is a disqualifier and what is not. And the good news is that whereas there are still things such as involuntary commitment to a psychiatric facility or imminent risk to yourself or others, things that make sense that truly do run an individual the risk of not getting a security clearance or keeping a security clearance, many of the things like seeking counseling, expressing concerns of anxiety, reporting those types of conditions, being on medications for depression and that being well managed, many of those things have no implication on your security clearance whatsoever. Depending on who you work for and the customer, you may or may not have to report it, but it absolutely it no longer means you're not going to get or you're not going to maintain a security clearance. And that was all really and very intentional effort by the federal government to build this element of trust and help the people understand that you truly should be seeking care for these issues that are concerning you, rather than sequestering them, pushing them away, and not speaking about them for risk of losing your security clearance. That all is an element of trust. And I think the final thing that I wanted to talk about that's important is this issue of inspiring hope. Now, what is hope? Hope can be defined many different ways, but for me, hope is instilling in someone that vision that there is something beyond the dark days that they're seeing, that there are resources, that there are opportunities, and that all ties to the work that employers are doing in their employee assistance programs, their EAP programs, to help get their employees connected to the resources. But even if you're working with someone, or even if you are that someone that struggles with purpose and why is this happening, you should always work to understand, one, there's always hope, or you should always be working to help give people hope, because as long as people have hope, they don't get desperate. Without hope, you become desperate. And we all know the challenges and complications that come when people are desperate. So I think that the incredible work that's being done here, helping to bring this information forward, and the work that all of the presenters are doing to continue to spread the message and help decrease the stigma, and most importantly, all the people that are here attending and watching, is incredibly important to understand how do you help others and how do you help yourself. With that, I'll stop there. Happy to answer any questions at the end. I'll give that back to you, Mark and David. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you,
Thank you,
Dr. Williams. First, let me say, Dr. Williams, thank you for sharing such a personal story. helps everyone understand that no one is immune to this, no matter what profession you choose or vocation you choose.
That's right. That's right. And apparently my microphone is working again. So isn't it amazing what technology can do? I do have a question here, and I wonder well, I will let Dr. Williams and Mark decide about tag teaming on this question. I think we can get
Dr.
perspectives
Williams.
from both of you. But let's start with Dr. Williams. An audience member named Jane Gehring asks, are there specific skills or training that can be helpful to managers in developing a safe workplace culture?
Mark, I'll let you go first, and then I'll chime in as well.
Thank you. Well, to be honest, I'm going to reiterate a lot of what Dr. Williams just said about active listening and connection and being able to ask those difficult questions. And active listening truly is not just listening for what you're going to say next or in your head formulating that next response. It's truly sitting there and absorbing everything they're telling you, even if you have to pause afterwards and say, wow, that is a lot. I'm not even sure what to say. I want to support you. I don't want to say the first thing that comes to mind. I want to say the right thing. And so I'm just going to sit here and absorb everything you're telling me, or however you want to say it. That you don't need to respond immediately to something so impactful, but you could miss a lot if that's all you're thinking about is, how am I going to respond to them? So that's just one specific skill. The question was also about resources. I'll tell you about two real quickly. One, there's a training out there called Mental Health First Aid.
Yes.
It's for organizations. It's extensive, but it's extremely helpful understanding what people might be going through, how to look for those different signs and symptoms, how to approach them. It's very skill-based training. There's another one called the HOPE Certification Program, which David and I are a part of. It stands for Helping Our People Elevate, which is more of a large-scale workplace training that helps people within their organization craft mentally healthy workplaces through their messaging, through their benefits, through leadership involvement. And so those are just two to go check out when it comes to resources. But Dr. Williams, what else would you add to that?
Well, I would say, Mark, I think one, your references are absolutely right. What I would encourage is that for any of you that are employees of an organization of any size, unless it's you working out of your home, reach out to your HR professional or reach out to your EAP organization and say, what training do we have available? Invariably across the board, every organization that I've spoken with that has a dedicated EAP resource has within that EAP resource training available, oftentimes at no cost to the company or the employee, on how do you make your managers more attuned to having conversations with your employees about their emotional well-being and health. And our EAP organization does that, and then I do that independently within our organization as well. So absolutely, please do reach out to your EAP organization if your company has one, to understand what they offer across all the bandwidth, because I'll guarantee you in most instances, it's more comprehensive than what you understand. I will say this, the number one thing to do is build the awareness. The mental health first aid program, any other, emotional well-being program, my goal and hope is that it builds an awareness that managers can absolutely have a conversation with their employees that says, how are you doing? And is there something that I can do to help? You're not asking for someone to disclose any protected personal health information. You're not requiring that or mandating, but it builds that element of trust. It shows that you care. It gives you the opportunity to listen and hear, both with your eyes, your ears, and your heart, right? And it helps you better understand what are the things that you can do to help your employees be more successful, productive, and satisfied with work, which is what we all as managers want.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Very well put, Dr. Williams.